Part 1. The most feared Empress fell for a quiet human guard, and everything changed. The throne room was not a place that made people feel safe. It was enormous. The ceiling was so high that the top of it disappeared into shadow. The walls were made of black stone that had been polished until it looked like still water. The air inside was cool and carried a smell like metal and something faintly burnt. Long purple lamps hung from chains and threw a strange light across everything, making the room feel like the inside of a dream that had not decided yet whether it was good or bad. At the far end of the room, on a raised platform of dark red stone, sat Empress Vareth Sola. She was not the largest being in the room. The Varek were slim people, with silver skin and long fingers and 4 eyes set in a vertical line on a sharp, angular face. Running from the top of their heads down to the base of their necks were what looked like ridges, or crests, made of the same silver skin but capable of shifting color depending on what the Varek was feeling. Varetha's crests were a deep, burning red. Every guard and servant and advisor in the room could see that color. Every one of them stood a little straighter because of it. She ruled 11 star systems. She had broken the Iron Fleet, a power that had controlled 6 worlds for over 100 years, in 11 days. Every species that had ever sat across from her at a table had eventually agreed to her terms, because the alternative was always made very clear. She was, in the simplest possible terms, someone you did not want to disappoint. The Terran diplomatic group had arrived 20 minutes late. It was not a huge amount of time. By some standards, in some places, it would not even be considered rude. But in the Dominion, being late to stand before the Empress was not just bad manners. It was a statement. It meant, whether you intended it or not, that you did not think she was worth your time. 3 visiting delegations in the past 5 years had arrived late. None of them had left the hall with what they came for. One of them had not left the hall at all. Counselor Alvin Burke, who led the Terran group, was clearly aware that something had gone wrong. He was a round-faced man in a dark formal jacket that was already showing sweat at the collar. He kept touching his translation bead with 2 fingers, the way people do when a device is misfiring and they are hoping that touching it will fix it. His 2 aides walked behind him like they had forgotten how their legs worked. Burke was speaking his prepared remarks into the room, but the translator bead was producing the wrong honorifics. He kept calling Vareth Your Highness, instead of Sovereign Flame, which in Varek formal language was roughly the difference between calling a general a corporal. The Empress's crests had not shifted from red since they entered. None of this was what caught her attention. What caught her attention was the human standing beside the left pillar near the entrance to the hall. He was Burke's personal guard. She had been told his name when the group was announced, the way all names in a delegation were announced, and she had not kept it. She never kept the names of guards. There was no reason to. Guards were part of the background of a room, like furniture or doorways. But this one was not behaving the way guards behaved. He was still. Not frozen. Not the rigid, held-in-place stillness of someone fighting the urge to look around. He was simply standing the way a person stands when they are completely comfortable with where they are and what they are doing. His hands were loose at his sides. His feet were set at an easy distance apart. He was wearing the standard gray uniform of the Terran Diplomatic Protection Service, nothing decorative, nothing that marked him out, and he was watching the room. Not staring. Watching. There was a difference that most people never noticed but Vareth noticed in everything. His eyes moved across the hall in a slow, careful pattern, exits, columns, the positions of her inner guard, the angles between the pillars and the raised platform. It was the movement of someone doing a job, not the movement of someone trying to look like they were doing a job. And then his eyes had come to her. Most beings, even trained ones, looked away when they met her gaze. It was fast, sometimes, a fraction of a second, but it was there, that small flinch, that flicker of something old and biological that said, this being is dangerous, do not hold its attention. The Cathali, whose bodies were wired for submission responses, dropped to the floor entirely. Even her own guards, who had served her for years, had a particular way of not quite meeting her eyes when she looked directly at them. The human guard had looked at her the way you look at a door to confirm it is closed. He noted her position. He held her gaze for a natural, unbothered moment. And then he looked away, continuing his scan of the room, as if she were simply one more piece of information in an environment he was mapping. Varetha's crests dimmed. Not to calm silver, but down from red, down toward something quieter. She did not notice this herself. But Driva, her head of household security, who was standing 3 steps to her right and who had been watching the Empress for 11 years, noticed it immediately. The audience continued. Burke stumbled through his remarks. The translator bead corrected itself eventually. The main points were exchanged, the preliminary agreements noted, and the session was closed without anyone being arrested or expelled, which Verith had already decided would be her one act of generosity for the day. As the Terran group was escorted out, she watched the guard move. He fell into position behind Burke with no wasted motion, checked the corridor ahead for 2 seconds before they stepped into it, and was gone. Driva appeared at her elbow. The Terran guard, Verith said, before Driva could speak. What is his name? Driva's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, the Varek equivalent of visible surprise. His name is Cole Danner, Sovereign Flame. He has held the Counselor's protective assignment for 2 standard years. His record. Assign him to my inner rotation. The silence that followed was short but full. Sovereign Flame, Driva said carefully, placing a foreign national in the inner ring is outside standard. I am aware of what is standard, Driva. Another silence. Yes, Sovereign Flame, Driva said. Cole Danner was notified of his reassignment 3 hours later, while he was helping Burke's team pack their equipment cases in the visitor wing. He read the transfer order twice. Then he set it down, picked up the equipment case he had been holding, and finished packing it. He had been in this kind of work long enough to understand that some things did not come with explanations, and that asking for one rarely helped. He would report to the Imperial Household Security Intake Office in the morning. He would learn the protocols. He would do the job. He had been planning to go home to Oregon. He had been thinking about fishing. He looked at the transfer order one more time. Then he folded it and put it in his pocket. Oregon would wait. Part 2. The most feared Empress fell for a quiet human guard, and everything changed. The Imperial household ran on a precise schedule. Every hour had a shape to it. Every corridor had a purpose. The guards of the inner ring, the 9 people whose job it was to be within 50 meters of the Empress at all times, knew the shape of each day the way a builder knows a floor plan. They moved through it without thinking, because when you had to think about the floor plan, you were not thinking about the room. Cole was added to the inner ring as a 10th member. He was given a full briefing package. It covered protocols for 12 different types of formal occasion, behavioral codes for the 6 categories of guests the Empress received, emergency procedures organized by threat level, and a list of 22 things that were never to be done in the Empress's presence under any circumstances. He read all of it the night before his first shift. He read it the way he read everything, slowly, carefully, with a pencil making small marks beside the things he wanted to remember. The first 2 weeks, he was watched. Not just by the security systems, which were constant and thorough and which he had expected. He was watched by Driva, who appeared at irregular intervals to observe how he was doing his job. He was watched by the other members of the inner ring, who kept their faces neutral but whose attention he could feel the way you feel a draft from a crack in a wall. And he was watched, though he took longer to confirm this, by the Empress herself. He became aware of it gradually. Not through anything obvious. She was careful. But in rooms where there were many people and many things demanding her attention, her focus had a pattern to it, and he began to understand the pattern. She was checking his position. Not constantly, but regularly, the way you check a door you are not sure you locked. He was a variable she was tracking. He found this interesting. He did not find it uncomfortable. On the 17th day, the door to the Imperial Library opened while he was posted outside it. The library was a room he had not been inside. He had seen tablets carried in and out of it, and based on the titles he had glimpsed, the Empress read military history and theoretical physics in roughly equal measure. The door opened at an hour when it was not supposed to open, and she stood in the frame and looked at him. "You have been reading," she said. He was holding a paperback against his side. He had been reading it during the quieter stretches of the watch, a novel, old and battered, the pages soft from years of use. He held it up without hesitation. She looked at the cover. "I do not know this. It is about a man who is confined to a hotel in a country that no longer exists," Cole said. "He cannot leave. So instead he learns to find everything he needs in a very small space. She was quiet for a moment. The ridges along the top of her head shifted from their usual calm silver to a faint yellow-orange. He had read in his briefing materials that this color meant something close to curiosity. "You find this useful," she said, "given your current situation." He thought about the fishing trip he had not taken. He thought about the corridor he had been standing in for 17 days. "I find it good company," he said. She looked at him for 3 more seconds. Then she went back into the library and the door closed. He did not consider this a conversation. It had been too short and too strange for that. But when he returned to his quarters that night after the shift change, there was a data tablet sitting on his bunk. It had not been there when he left. Loaded onto it were 47 books, all of them translated into Standard Terran, all of them from what he could identify as the Empress's personal library. He charged the tablet and started the first book. Over the weeks that followed, they talked about the books. These conversations were short, and they happened in the odd moments between her commitments, in corridors, in doorways, during the few minutes between one meeting ending and another beginning. She had opinions about everything she read, and she stated them plainly, without softening them to see how he would react. He had not met many people who did that. Most people, in his experience, said things at an angle, watching to see if you agreed before they committed to a position. She simply said what she thought. He did the same. He had always done the same, and it had gotten him in trouble more than once in his life: supervisors who wanted agreement, colleagues who wanted their ideas reflected back at them unchanged. He had learned to be quiet when quiet was called for. But he had never learned to pretend he thought something he did not think. She seemed, if anything, to find his directness unremarkable. As if it was simply the correct way to have a conversation, and everything else was waste. The other 9 members of the inner ring noticed what was happening. He knew they noticed because of the way the geometry of the room changed when he and the Empress were near each other. The others arranged themselves differently. There was more space around him than there had been at the start. Not hostile space, no one had been hostile, exactly, but considered space. The kind of space you give something when you are not sure yet what category it belongs to. He understood this. He was not sure what category he belonged to either. He kept doing the job. He stood where he was supposed to stand. He read the books she sent him. He noted the positions of exits and blind spots and the angles between things. When she was in a room, he was aware of the room the way you are aware of weather, not thinking about it specifically, but always knowing which direction the wind was coming from. He went for runs in the lower courtyard in the mornings, alone, in the same oval pattern, 45 minutes, reliable as a clock. He ate from a small container he carried, whatever the household kitchens had available, sitting wherever he happened to be stationed. He slept 7 hours. He woke up and did it again. He did not miss Oregon any less. But he had stopped thinking about it as a thing that was coming soon. It had become something further away, not because he was unhappy, but because the place he was in had become, quietly and without announcement, the place he was actually living. That shift happened slowly. He only noticed it when it was already done. Part 3. The most feared Empress fell for a quiet human guard, and everything changed. The Dominion's intelligence office was very good at its job. It had to be. 11-star systems produced 11 different sets of problems, and the people whose job it was to know things before those things became dangerous had spent generations getting better at it. They had files on every significant person who entered the imperial household. They ran regular evaluations. They updated their reports with the kind of discipline that made other intelligence services look sloppy. 6 weeks into Cole Danner's assignment to the Inner Ring, they produced a 22-page report titled, Behavioral Analysis, Terran Protective Unit, Imperial Household. The report was, in its careful professional language, deeply confused. The analysts had built their prediction around a simple model. A being placed in a new and high-pressure environment, among people it did not know, following rules it had not grown up with, under constant observation, in a building where any significant mistake could get it killed, that being would show stress. It would seek alliances. It would try to build safety through relationships, or through demonstrated usefulness, or through making itself small enough that it stopped attracting attention. These were the patterns seen in every case study the office had on record. Cole was not doing any of these things. He was polite. He spoke to junior household staff the same way he spoke to senior ones, directly, without calculation. When a third-ring guard named Veth was struggling to carry a broken equipment case up 4 flights of stairs, Cole had appeared, without being asked, and helped carry it. He had not mentioned this afterward. He had simply done it and returned to his post. But he was not building alliances. He was not trying to acquire status. He sat alone during the stretches between duties. He ran alone in the mornings. He read his books alone. He was not suffering visibly from this. He was not performing contentment either. He simply seemed like a man who was comfortable in his own company and had never felt a strong need to explain himself. The analysts wrote, "Subject displays no measurable social anxiety in isolation." This was unusual. Most non-Varec subjects in high-pressure household postings showed elevated indicators by week 3. Cole was in week 6 and his numbers looked like a man on a routine assignment in a familiar building. What the analysts could not account for, and said so, in careful footnotes, was the specific background that had produced Cole Danner. They had his file. They had the basic facts of his life. But facts on a page do not carry texture, and the texture was the thing that mattered. He had grown up in a place where silence was normal. Not an empty silence, a full one. The kind that comes from being in a small community where everyone knows the shape of their own life and does not need to constantly announce it. He had learned early that being quiet was not the same as being absent. He had learned that patience was not just waiting, it was paying attention while you waited, so that when the moment came that required you, you were ready. He had gone into security work because it suited the person he already was. The long, still hours of a watch did not drain him. They gave him time to think, to read, to observe. He was good at observing. He noticed things without announcing that he was noticing them, which was, in his experience, the most useful way to notice things. He had also been through some difficult years. His file noted 2 operational incidents that had gone badly wrong, the kind of situations where people died and there was no clean way to understand it. He had gotten through those years by doing the same thing he always did, staying still on the inside, finding the next right thing to do, and doing it. After that, a palace full of watchful aliens was not something that required getting used to. It was just the next place he was. What he had not expected was Vareth herself. His briefing materials had been thorough about what she was. Ruler of 11 systems. Military record that made most war strategists go quiet when they read it. A court built deliberately on fear, because she had decided a long time ago that fear was more reliable than affection. She had made that decision with clear eyes, understanding exactly what it cost and concluding that the cost was acceptable. All of that was true. He had believed all of it before he arrived, and nothing he had seen had contradicted it. What the briefing materials had not said, could not say, really, was that she was funny. Not in an obvious way. In the quiet way that very intelligent people sometimes are, where they make an observation that is so precisely accurate about something ridiculous that it takes a second to catch up with it. She had said to him once, after a session with 3 delegations from a border dispute that had been running for 40 years, every one of them wanted me to think their fear was wisdom. Not one of them considered that I might simply be tired. He had said, would telling them that help? She had looked at him the way you look at someone who has said something unexpected. No. Then it is probably not worth the effort, he said. She had gone quiet for a moment, and something had moved in her face, not a full expression, just the beginning of one. Her crests had shifted to a soft yellow gold. He had not said anything else. He did not need to. This was what the intelligence report could not model and could not explain, that Vareth Sola, who had everything and feared nothing and was obeyed by billions, had never in her adult life had a single conversation with someone who did not want something from her. Every diplomat wanted a treaty. Every advisor wanted influence. Every guard wanted approval or promotion or simply to survive the day without making an error. The wanting was always there, underneath everything, shaping every word. Cole did not want anything from her. He was not performing indifference. He genuinely had no agenda beyond doing his job correctly. He was curious about her the way he was curious about anything he found interesting, which was to say quietly and without needing to act on it. He did not need her to like him. He did not need her to approve of him. He did not need anything about their situation to be different from what it was. She could feel the absence of that wanting the way you can feel the absence of a noise that has finally stopped. The intelligence report concluded, on its final page, that Cole Danner represented an anomaly that did not fit any existing category and that further observation was recommended. They were not wrong. But further observation was not going to explain it. Some things are not produced by a system. They are just produced by a person, over a long and ordinary life, without anyone planning for them. Part 4. The most feared Empress fell for a quiet human guard, and everything changed. 3 months into Cole's assignment, someone tried to kill the Empress. The attempt was not a sophisticated one. It was the kind of plan that gets made by people who are running out of options, a separatist faction from one of the outer systems, underfunded and badly organized, who had decided that removing Vareth was the fastest path to independence. They had modified an atmospheric survey drone, packed it with a signal disruptor and enough kinetic material to do serious damage, and slipped it into the formation of a fleet review that she was scheduled to attend. The fleet review was an annual event. The Empress stood on an observation deck above the yard and watched the ships cycle through their formations. It was considered a safe occasion. The security footprint was large, the site was controlled, and the guest list was limited to verified military personnel. None of this made it impossible to reach. It just made it harder. The inner ring received a warning 3 seconds before the drone was flagged by the fleet's automated defense systems. 3 seconds is a long time if you know what you are doing. It is no time at all if you are still deciding what to do. Cole had already moved. He had repositioned himself that morning, quietly, without explaining it to anyone, to a spot 2 meters to the left of his assigned post. He had done this the same way he always did these small adjustments, arriving early, standing where his sense of the room told him to stand, and not making a production of it. He had been making these adjustments throughout his assignment. The other members of the inner ring had noticed but had not questioned it, partly because the adjustments were always small and partly because he was never wrong. When the alert came and the formation moved to cover the Empress, Cole was already in the right place. He moved her left, toward the reinforced structural column at the far edge of the observation deck. If something was coming, he wanted something solid at his back. He wanted the column between the Empress and the open yard. The drone was destroyed by point defense fire at a distance of 300 meters. The explosion was visible but distant. No one was injured. The whole event lasted 11 seconds from warning to resolution. Cole walked the Empress back to the inner corridor and returned to his post. He did not say anything. He did not look like a man who had just done something notable. He looked like a man who had completed a step in a process he had already planned. Driva found him in the corridor outside the debriefing room afterward. She looked at him for a long time without speaking, the way you look at a complicated piece of machinery when you are trying to understand how it works. "You moved before the alert," she said. "Yes," he said. "How did you know?" He thought about it for a moment, because it was a fair question and deserved a fair answer. The formation in the yard had a gap in the upper left quadrant that was not there in the rehearsal. Small things were off from the day before. Cargo traffic on the far side of the yard had been rerouted overnight. Someone in logistics had received a communication that was not in the morning report. He paused. "I am not sure I noticed all of it clearly. I just knew the room was wrong." Driva was quiet for a moment. "You have been doing this all along," she said slowly. "The small position changes. Someone should be where the gap is," Cole said. This was, in some ways, the most complete explanation of himself he had ever given anyone. He had never been good at explaining it. When he was younger he had tried, and people had either not understood or had found it unsettling, so he had learned to simply do it and let the results speak. The results usually did speak, clearly enough. Driva put him in for a formal commendation. The household system did not know what category to file it under, since there was no existing framework for commending a foreign national serving in the inner ring, so it sat in an administrative queue for 3 weeks before someone created a new category for it. That evening, the Empress came to the corridor where he was posted. She had never done this before. It was not how her schedule worked. Her movements had a pattern and a purpose, and standing in a corridor to look out a window was not part of either. But she came, and she stood beside him, and she looked out the window at the fleet yards in the distance where the light of the evening was still sitting on the hulls of the ships. "You stood in the wrong place," she said. Wrong is one way to say it, Cole agreed. She was quiet for a moment. I have had 37 people die protecting me during my reign, she said. I do not enjoy it. I was not planning to die, he said. I was planning to make the geometry better. She looked at him then. Not a quick glance, a full look, the kind she used when she was reading something carefully and wanted to make sure she understood it. The geometry, she said. Things do not come at you in straight lines, he said. They curve. If you can read where the curves are going, you can be in the right place before the problem arrives. You do not have to be fast if you are already there. She was still looking at him. Her crests had gone through several colors during this conversation, the amber of focus, the pale yellow of consideration, and now they had settled into something he had not seen before. A warm, reddish gold, like copper left in sunlight. He looked back at her without any particular expression. He was not trying to hold her gaze. He was just not looking away, because there was no reason to. You are a very strange man, Cole Danner, she said. I have heard that before, he said. She was quiet for another moment. And then, small, precise, entirely her own, a smile arrived on her face. Not the kind of smile that is performed for an audience. The kind that happens when something is simply, genuinely, a little bit funny to the person having it. Good, she said. She walked away down the corridor. He watched the direction she had gone for a moment after she was out of sight. Then he turned back to the window and the yard and the ships in the fading light. There was something warm in his chest that had not been there before. He was not sure what to do with it, so he did what he always did with things he had not figured out yet. He let it sit. He paid attention to the room. He waited. He was, after all, very good at waiting. Part 5. The most feared Empress fell for a quiet human guard, and everything changed. The document arrived 8 months into his assignment, and it was 40 pages long. It had been produced by 3 different legal offices working in coordination, because there was no single existing framework that could contain what it was trying to say. The Varec Dominion's legal system was detailed and old and had covered almost every situation that 11-star systems could produce across 4 centuries of governance. But it had not covered this. Nobody had thought to cover this. The document was, in formal terms, a proposed accord between the Varec Dominion and the Terran Confederation. It used the careful language of diplomatic agreements. It was organized into sections and subsections and had numbered clauses and attached protocols. If you read only the first 10 pages, you might think it was a routine treaty about shared border management and trade access. Which was what it partly was. But on page 31, in language that was careful without being quite able to hide what it meant, there was a provision for a permanent Terran liaison to the imperial household. This position had no historical equivalent. The legal teams had looked. There was nothing in any archive that matched it. They had created new language for it from scratch, and even the new language was slightly uncomfortable with itself, because the nature of the position was not something that translated cleanly into clauses and subparagraphs. What it meant, in plain terms, was that Cole Danner would stay. The Terran Confederation's council called him by remote link. He sat in his quarters in the household staff wing, in the same chair where he had read all 47 of her books, and looked at 7 council members on a screen. They were serious people who were doing their best to understand something that their experience had not prepared them for. Counselor Burke was present as well, in the back of the room, because someone had decided that continuity required it. He had not fully recovered from his original audience with the Empress. He still touched his translation bead sometimes when he was nervous, even when he was not wearing one. The council asked Cole whether he had any understanding of how the situation had developed. He thought about it carefully before he answered. I stood where I was needed, he said. I did not want anything from her. I think that was not something she had experienced before. The council was quiet for a moment. Burke said, from the back of the room, she likes you. Cole thought about copper-colored crests. He thought about a small and genuine smile. He thought about 47 books left on a bunk by someone who ruled 11-star systems and had no obvious reason to give a guard anything. I think that is probably true, he said. The accord was ratified 4 weeks later. What followed was the kind of change that is hard to see when you are inside it but very clear from a distance. The 3 border systems that had been a source of low-level conflict for 40 years were placed under joint oversight. New administrative offices were opened. New trade routes were established. Problems that had been sitting in unresolved piles for decades began to move through to solutions, because the 2 largest powers in the region had stopped treating each other as threats. The cultural exchange program began in the first year. 3,000 Terrans went into Varek space. 3,000 Varek went into Terran space. They went as students, researchers, workers, artists, and observers. They learned each other's languages and cooking and ways of measuring time. Some of them stayed. Some came back changed in ways they found hard to explain. They wrote things and made things and asked questions that neither side had thought to ask before, and over time those questions became answers, and those answers became part of how both cultures understood themselves. The diplomatic relationship between the Confederation and the Dominion restructured a significant portion of the known galaxy's political arrangements. When the most feared empire in 11 systems sat down at a table and behaved in good faith, other parties looked at their own positions and reconsidered them. Alliances shifted. Old agreements were renegotiated. Some small wars that had been building slowly in outlying systems simply stopped building, because the conditions that had been feeding them changed. Cole was present for most of this. Not as a guard, that designation had been quietly retired during the first year, replaced by the new title that the legal teams had invented and that still did not sit quite comfortably in its own definition. He stood beside Vareth in meeting rooms and corridors and on observation decks above fleet yards. He noted the positions of exits. He stood where the gaps were. He was very good at being in a room without making the room about him, which turned out to be a quality that was useful in almost every diplomatic context. He never went back to Oregon. He thought about it sometimes, the smell of the river, the weight of a fishing rod, the particular quiet of early morning on water. He thought about the woodworking project that was still sitting on his workbench at home, half-planned, waiting. He thought about these things without sadness. They had not gone anywhere. They would be there when he eventually got to them. They read in the mornings, when her schedule allowed. The library door was open to him now, had been for months, and they sat in 2 chairs near the window with the fleet yards in the distance, reading in companionable quiet. When she finished something she had opinions about it. When he finished something he had opinions about it. They disagreed regularly, and she had found this startling at first. No one disagreed with her, not directly, not about something as personal as how a book made them feel, and then she had stopped finding it startling and had started finding it a relief. "No one argues with me," she had said, one morning, about nothing in particular. "Everyone argues," he said. "Most people just do not say it out loud to you." She had looked at him across the room. Her crests had gone copper. "You are still a very strange man." "You already decided that was good," he said. She looked at him the way she looked at everything she was reading, fully, carefully, without pretending not to see what was there. The copper in her crests deepened slightly in the morning light. He looked back at her. He did not flinch and he did not look away and he did not want anything except to be exactly where he was. Outside the window, the ships in the yard caught the early light on their hulls. Somewhere in the border systems, a Varek student was learning to cook a Terran meal and getting it slightly wrong in a way that would eventually become its own tradition. Somewhere else, a Terran researcher was reading a Varek physics paper and drawing a connection that nobody on either side had made before. Things were different now. They had been changing for a long time, slowly and without drama, the way most important things change. And all of it had started in a throne room, 8 months and a whole life ago, when a quiet man in a gray uniform had looked at the most powerful being in 11-star systems and simply had not looked away.